Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first official podcast episode for United Network News. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with UNN. And if you haven't seen any of our newscasts yet, well then, you guys are in for a treat. We are not like any other news program out there. We discuss the real news. So let's talk about that for a second. It's the first episode. We're just kind of meeting each other. So let's break this down. What do we mean when we say the real news? Well, you've probably heard the term fake news before, right? But the truth is pretty much all news reported by major media outlets is fake news. And most of us are just learning about this harsh reality. And most alternative media outlets are fake news too. They give this illusion of being real and authentic because sometimes they call out the fake news. But here's the thing. The information they give comes from the exact same people who give the fake news to the mainstream media outlets. They're just giving the alternative media a different story to tell. And we call this controlled opposition. But UNN is different. See, we don't get our news from all of those sources. We have access to the highest security clearance in the world, not just the US, in the entire world. And yes, they are all on the same system, and we have access to it all. We don't have to get our news from somebody else because we get it firsthand. And most times, we know the truth about what's going on before all of the other governments and non-governmental organizations out there even have a clue as to what's really happening. And we focus not only on what's happening here on Earth, which is a lot. Trust me, there's a lot going on. It may not seem like it because, again, mainstream media is not reporting it, and they're kind of doing the same headlines over and over again. But so much is happening right now that is critical for humanity. But we don't just talk about what's happening here on Earth. We talk about the entire multiverse, which includes the universe with all dimensions and densities. Now, if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that, that's okay. Keep listening to this podcast. You're going to learn a lot. And we have a newscast that is released through our online distribution platform. So that's available on unitednetwork.tv if you want to check that out and see all the devices that you can access all of our streaming content on. But our newscast comes out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now, at this time, United Network, as well as United Network News, is a membership-based subscription site. So you do have to pay to access the content, which is one reason why I think doing a podcast like this is super important, because the news has to get out there in some capacity. We also have to pay the bills. So we're trying to do both, okay? Hence this podcast. And we're calling this podcast The Rundown. And my plan is to record these episodes right after I get done recording the news. So in these episodes, we're going to run down some of the important stories that we cover on the news. But I'm not going to read it word for word. You're going to have to subscribe in order to get all of that stuff. I'm just going to give you an overview. And if there's some side things that need to be said, or I don't know, maybe some funny stories happen from the newsroom that day, I don't know. We're going to try to have as much fun with this as we possibly can while giving you the information that you need. And get this, I've also been given the green light to include a portion of our world situation report in these episodes. Now, if you don't know what that report is, it's all good, but sit tight, okay? You may want to grab a pen and a piece of paper, get ready to take some notes, because, guys, this is as real as it gets. And if you happen to find this podcast because, I don't know, you were scrolling through and looking for Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson or something like that, then this is probably going to sound like we're talking about some sort of crazy science fiction series. And it may be really hard for some people to believe. And you know what? That's okay. Even if you have your doubts, I encourage you to keep listening because sooner than later, it's going to start making sense. Okay? So are we ready to get started? Here's the rundown for Monday, August 28th, 2023. We start all of our newscasts with something that we call our field messenger reports. Field messengers, think of them like citizen journalists. They are people just like you. They don't necessarily have any experience in journalism per se, but what they do know is their area. What they do care about is what is happening in their community. And we think those are the best people to report on the topics that are impacting them the most. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to send a fancy correspondent from New York City to cover something that the community knows better than anybody else. So those are our field messengers, and we have hundreds, and, this is growing and growing. We will have thousands. I think we've released over, it's like 500 and something. I'm going to mess up the number. Field messenger reports we've released so far. And it's great. We have a few in each newscast. And in this newscast, we have two. The first one is from Michelle in Idaho. So shout out to Michelle. And Michelle does this story about rejuvenation after the fires. And she uses her own community as an example. She shows us a fire that took place. And I believe she said it was last September. It burned a ton of acres, 38,000 acres, she said. And her whole story was about regrowth and how long does it take once a fire like that occurs to have the area be replenished again naturally. And it's a long time. It can take thousands of years, by the way. And Michelle goes into some ideas and some things that you can do in your community to help with that regrowth. And this is a great story because we are seeing a lot of what I will call, in air quotes, natural disasters happening around the world. We're going to get into that a little bit more when we talk about the world news stories. But this is an example of, taking a national story, something that's impacting a lot of people right now in different ways, and localizing it. So it was a great report. Thumbs up, Michelle, to you. Our second report comes from Desmond, and Desmond is in Ghana, which is in West Africa. And he does this great story about a really big need in his community, and that is that they do not have clean water. And he shows us what is happening. And he calls it a river, but oh my goodness, it's a very small river, if it is a river. And the people in Ghana are using this river, and so are the animals. And it is, not clear water, let's put it that way. But they're all drinking it, and it can't be good for you, right? And he talks about how, they used to have this water pumping machine, but that hasn't worked for a really long time. It needs to be replaced. And this is an opportunity for restoration in his area, and he's showing us the need. A lot of times when we get these field messenger reports, the people doing the reports, they will just send us the footage, maybe with a voiceover. Sometimes we get still images, and then we have a production team that puts all of this together. And sometimes, depending on the story, there'll be two different types of reports that are released. There's a longer report that goes out on our app for United Network. And then there is a shorter version, it's usually around 2 minutes or less, that goes out on the news. So if you want to see these stories that I was just telling you about with Michelle and Desmond, you can go to our news website, which is unitednetwork.news, and the full report, the longer report, is available on the website for free anytime you want. So those are our field messenger reports for the newscast. Now let's talk about some of the world news stories. And like I said, I'm not going to be reading a script for you guys. You're not going to hear a bunch of sound bites like you might in other official newscast podcasts, if you will. But I want to go down some of these stories that I think are worth checking out so you can do your own research. Because one of the things that we believe at UNN is that news is no longer a spectator sport. You are not going to just turn on your TV anymore and just consume. Okay, that was a way of the past, and they would tell you anything and everything they wanted to, and people would just sit there and believe it. Anything we say on this podcast, anything we say on our newscast, I encourage you guys to do your own research. Don't just listen to somebody and just believe it outright. Use your own discernment. Try to see what information you can find online. And when we talk about the world news stories on this podcast, I'm going to give you some information so that you can do a little bit of digging. So you can go down a couple of what we call rabbit holes, right? Where you're researching a topic and you go deeper and you go deeper. So a couple of the big stories that we talk about in this newscast are election related. So we talk about Zimbabwe just had a presidential election. Gabon, which is on the west coast of Africa, they had an election. In fact, it wasn't just presidential for them, but it was legislative. They had a local election all at the same time. And there are voting irregularities. There are voting delays. Ballots aren't showing up. In fact, in Gabon, the government was trying to silence the people, and this is true, that they had a nationwide internet shutdown to stop what they are calling online disinformation, which is people talking about these problems and saying, hey guys, something isn't right. So the US has problems, obviously. And trust me, it wasn't just 2020. So if you are on the 2020 needs to be fixed bandwagon, here's something that you need to know. And this is for everybody, not just people in the US. You have never had a free election, ever. The people at the top decide who they want in office, and it really doesn't matter which side wins, because whoever gets in office is a puppet. They do what they are told, and if they don't, they're out, or there's an assassination attempt, or something like that happens. This is the reality of our elections. And let me tell you, when I first discovered this was a very hard red pill for me to swallow, because I grew up in a household where it was get out the vote. You know, my mom literally worked at the local polls and encouraged people to sign up and help them with their ballots. My dad was always running for something in our local city council. I just grew up thinking this is how you make change. It's through a ballot. So when I found out that there are other people pulling the strings and politics is just a show to make us think that we have what we like to call here in the US democracy and freedom, that was really tough for me. But again, we're giving you the facts here. So when you see stories about elections, and elections allegedly not going the right way, and then you've got this back and forth, and the citizens are protesting, and the government says everything worked out fine. What's the problem here? Know that politicians are selected. They are not elected. There have always been voting irregularities. We are just waking up to this fact. In addition to the election stories, we talk about this big storm, this hurricane that is being downgraded, I believe, to a tropical storm that's headed towards Florida. We have to start asking ourselves these questions. Why are we having such crazy weather across the entire globe here? It is not just Florida. I know Florida gets hit with a lot of stuff regardless. But a couple weeks ago, I had a hurricane headed my way. I live in California. See, I'm used to earthquakes. I am not used to hurricane weather heading my way. And we have the devastation that happened in Lahaina, in Hawaii. This is not normal. And we have to quit saying, oh, isn't that strange? And just leaving it at that. We have to start asking the difficult and the challenging questions. Why is this happening? Is a plague next? Is God going to send some frogs or something? What in the world is going on here? This is not natural. And when I say it's not natural, you guys, some of this is man-made, like what happened in Hawaii. That is man-made. Those fires were intentional. But man did not do all of this. The crazy stuff that we're seeing, these hurricane-type winds and in strange places, things like that, this was triggered from an elaborate, let's just call it a computer system, okay? A very high-tech, nothing you've seen on this planet computer system, and it was designed to keep us back as humanity. When humanity and the planet got too light, too positive, these things would automatically trigger. It's like an elaborate fail-safe or perhaps a dead man switch. We also had an interesting story on the news that a lot of people may just scroll over, but I wanted to explain it a bit because you may start to see more headlines like this. This is about the country of Nicaragua, and they have revoked the legal rights of the Jesuit community. If you have not done a deep dive into what the Jesuit community is, I suggest you do so. Pope Francis is part of this community. He is a Jesuit. And if you haven't done a deep dive into Pope Francis, there's another rabbit hole for you. Give it some time, okay? That is a long one to go through. But what's interesting about this story is some people may just look at this and go, oh, what is going on in Nicaragua? It's like they don't like Catholics. What's going on? Are they, just being mean to Catholics? No, there's a reason for this. So in these kind of headlines, you see this, it kind of stands out. Don't fall for, oh, they're just being mean to this, small group of Catholics or whatever. That is not what this is about. There is a very specific reason why the Jesuits are being targeted, and we are going to get into that in just a little bit. We've got a lot of news in the World Situation Report that ties things back to the Jesuit community. So remember that name because you may be seeing it in the news more often. And then the last story that I wanted to bring up is more of a health-related story. And I think this is just interesting because remember this whole big push transitioning from plastic straws to paper straws? Well, there is a new European study that just came out, and it is showing that there are trace levels of PFAs in paper straws. In fact, I believe they tested 20 different brands, and 18 of the 20 brands tested positive for these PFAs. And it's a really long word, what PFA stands for. What you need to know is these are long-lasting chemicals. They stay in your body. Sometimes they're called forever chemicals, if you've heard that term before. They cause cancer. They cause other issues in your body. So this is a big deal, and it kind of makes you wonder why all of these large corporations made this switch to paper straws. I mean, we thought the turtles were being impacted by the plastic, right? There's usually an underlying story here, and they will pull on your heartstrings to get you to change your behavior. But when you dig a little deeper, you realize there are ulterior motives. And a lot of it's money related. Follow the money, right? You've heard that saying? This obviously was not the best way to go for humanity. We don't need forever chemicals in our body. And he also held this position. Of course, that was thousands of years ago. And now, through a series of events, Kim now has this position. And she works really hard to keep our planet safe and protect our assets because the planet has assets. Most of these are in-ground assets. You think of gold and oil and all that kind of stuff. But this is what our financial system is based on. If the bankers had it their way, and they did for a really long time, they would just make up numbers for fiat money, right? Oh, your money is worth this, your money is worth that, based on whatever served their personal and business interests. But we are now kind of in this whole transition where things are going back to being asset-based. There are a lot of people on this planet at the tippy top that don't like that idea because that takes money out of their pocket. And they are lashing out right now, which is why it seems like there is so much chaos on this planet. Even if you don't physically see it, although the headlines kind of show you the craziness that's going on in some countries and, the military is moving over here and it's doing this. And then you've got the whole war in Ukraine with Russia. So you see a little bit of it, but you don't really know why it's happening. And some of you may have almost like a sixth sense that there's a lot going on right now, but you can't put your finger on exactly what that is. And that's why we have the World Situation Report, because we tell you what's happening. Why are you feeling this way? Well, because there's all this craziness going on. In this newscast, there's a lot that Kim covers for the World Situation Report, but there are two stories that I thought were worth kind of going into and sharing on today's podcast. And the first has to do with all this activity that's going on in the Middle East. Remember when we were talking about the world news stories, we talked about Nicaragua and how they revoked the legal rights of the Jesuits? Well, here come the Jesuits once again, because they are one of several groups of people who think that they are in charge of the world right now. These different groups are pretty much rotating who's in charge. So one group will try to go and do some damage, and that doesn't work out. And then another group will go and try to do some stuff. But what the Jesuits are doing right now, they're basically taking orders from the Chinese. These are the dragon families, if you've heard of that term before. And the Jesuits are ordering militaries to get ready for war. So the military actually got $48 million from Russian oligarchs to do this. Now, $48 million to start, well, it doesn't take any money really to start a war, but to play it out, to wrap it up, a lot of money, a lot more than $48 million to do this, okay? So that is a drop in the bucket, and these people don't have any money. So how are they going to get the soldiers to fight each other? They want to start this war because in the past, wars have made money. So they want to start this unnatural war in the Middle East. But how do you get soldiers to fight each other if you don't pay them? And their plans are downright scary. Here's part of my conversation with Kim.
Now, in order to help this war along, because they know that the $48 million that they collected, like a telethon, will not last very long, they need to make sure that all the soldiers will fight each other.
Okay.
So here's the plan. They have found some very old medication. It is being touted to be phenethylene and amphetamines, which is not uncommon. Militaries around the world tend to use this drug, or they put it in the food, if you don't know, of militaries around the world to make the soldiers stay up longer, be more alert, that type of thing. But this is a little special. Now, it's not as effective as it would have been, 20 or 30 years ago, but this was manufactured in a Nazi-type facility. Back to Hitler again. Here we go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this actually contains also Femtotech.
Okay, so it's like a microtech, like micro.
Oh,
yeah,
yes. Okay. Yes. So what this particular Femtotech is designed to do, it does have a viral carrier in there. But it's also designed to be remote controlled from a computer system, which is no longer existing now as of this moment, I'm going to say this wrong, Liaoyang, China. It was underneath the Liaoyang Ancient Tomb Museum. And they had an intention of giving these drugs. So the drugs are being transported to Iran. And because they're partners, Iran is the Middle Eastern version of China, China's deep state. And they're being transported across the Iraqi border with cooperation from the Jesuit order.
There they are again.
Yeah, the Jesuits absolutely know that this is tainted. They absolutely are on board with the Chinese controlling the United States military by using Femtotech, because those heavy metals will go straight to the brain, and then they're going to do whatever they tell them to do and not what the U.S. generals say. For that matter, anybody over there will probably also have this infected in the brain. So this is a warning to all of the people that are in Iraq right now, whether they're Americans or the Iraqi soldiers or the PMF or the Iranians that are there, pro-Iranians, and the Jordan people. This is not a normal amphetamine. It is tainted. It is coming from China. Do they have another computer that they can remote control you from once you're infected with this? I don't know. We got one for sure, but is there another one? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I'm just telling you right now, it's coming right across the Iranian border to Iraq in order to infect all of the young men and women that are have been deployed recently to there. It's also going to be distributed throughout Syria. So this is a warning. I'm going to give it to you again. Do not. Number one, even the Americans aren't even aware, because I did some checking to see if they were also involved. Not to say that they're un-American Jesuits, because the American Jesuits know, but does the military know? As far as I know, no. At this point, they do not know about the transportation of these drugs over the border coming from China.
Would it be beneficial, Kim, for them to know? Because you could obviously reach out and let them know if they would believe
I'll probably do that when we're done with the news here, because this is all information that we just found out within the last hour.
Okay.
So for all of these reasons, just so you know, Hitler is the one that invented the amphetamines, giving amphetamines to the soldiers during World War II. Him in the Nazi laboratories. So this entire situation is not new. This Femtotech is very old. I don't know how effective it's going to be. It is kind of like the predecessor, like Black Widow Program 1.0. So I'm not really sure, the end results of that. But I absolutely, if you're watching this, you have friends, you're in the military, people over there that just were deployed to Syria or Iraq. Please tell your friends, make sure that they're aware of all of this, because we don't need to have, our young men and women that are over there, remote controlled like robots from China. Yeah, that would be bad.
There you go. So that's how they plan to get these soldiers to fight for them. If you don't have any money, maybe you can control them, remote control them, as Kim said. Now, obviously, we're going to do everything possible to stop that from happening. But if you have someone that you love that could be impacted by this, that's why we're doing this story today. We need to get the word out there as much as possible. The next soundbite is from a bit later in the World Situation Report, and Kim is referring to 12 people that have been chosen to rule the world. Kinda, sorta, not really, okay? These are people that were chosen by the Rothschilds. Do a deep dive on the Rothschilds. You will find out they are a family that's involved in a lot of different things. They believe they're from the line of Solomon. And the Rothschilds commonly partner with the Chinese deep state to get this kind of stuff done. And they want a world government. You've heard this concept before, a one world government. And they have promised 12 people that they can run the whole thing, which kind of sounds crazy, but these people are kind of crazy. And Kim explains it here.
So when you can't pay, you give people titles. So these particular 12 people are, I wouldn't call them, enormously wealthy, but, in the world of elite people, those are the hundreds of billions of dollars people. But I will tell you that they're all fairly wealthy people. And they were chosen by the Rothschilds and Chinese deep state. They're the same people, different colors, but same people, to run the world. Now, they feel that they can achieve this world war, and then they will install a one world government, because all of the governments are about to crash, aren't they?
Yeah.
So just so you know, I don't know the names of the people just yet, because this is new information that has just come in the last couple of days, and we're doing some research to try to figure out who they promised. But I know it's 4 Russian oligarchs, 5 Ukrainians. Wouldn't you like a world run by like a Zelensky kind of guy? Yeah, you would. Now, these are going to be a face front government, just so you know. This is not a, hidden behind
shadow government.
No.
Okay.
These people will be your only heads of state. There's one in the UK and one in the US and one Nigerian.
Any idea, Kim, how they came up with this group of people?
Absolutely. Would you like to know the selection process for these people?
Yes, please.
Okay, number 1, people who still have money.
Okay.
People who will fight to have a title, fame, and fortune and power of being the world government. So you also must have an ego.
Yes.
You also, number 3, must be willing to spend your own personal money in order to achieve this position, because the Chinese deep state and the Rothschilds are broke. The Jesuits are also pretty broke. I mean, they couldn't even scrape up 45 million. Now, these guys are drug runners, they human trafficking. These are the guys that provide all of the young children to the Vatican people for their ceremonies and all of this. So, they should be making some money, unless they just don't want to spend their own for their own war that they're creating. I don't know. But that's who these people are. I mean, so as far as this world government is concerned, number one, the Chinese government deep state, the Order of the Dragon, the Jesuit order, and whoever else has no capacity to install a one world government. Zero, absolutely zero, like less than zero. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that this group, if they're, just in case they happen to be listening here, if anyone from this group is under the impression that they are going to be powerful, they're wrong. Because did you notice that there's no Chinese people on there? So the Chinese deep state, why wouldn't they not be on there? If you were going to be the all-powerful ones, of course they would have somebody in there, wouldn't they? No. They're going to be driving you from behind. The world will still be run by China in their mind.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. That is the plan, at least how China sees it. And they are trying to get power. This is power that they have been promised. In 2023, the U.S. was supposed to essentially crash. The dollar was supposed to crash. China was supposed to take over. And then China rules the world. And it gets much more nefarious than that. This is where all the biblical stuff starts to come in, okay? Literally handing over power to the Antichrist, demons, all of these people that were supposed to rule us for eternity. And that's not happening. And they're not happy that their plan for whatever it is, thousands of years, is not working out. And they are lashing out, but they don't have the control. Thank God. Literally, thank God they don't have the control. But this is the power struggle that is going on behind the scenes. This is the reason that you may feel uneasy right now even if you don't really know what's going on. We're not going to play a clip from it, but there was another kind of interesting point that Kim brought out in this newscast for something called the center of the world. Have you ever heard of something called the center of the world? Well, it's literally in the middle of nowhere, and it kind of looks like this weird tourist attraction. It is between California and Nevada, and it's got some really weird stuff. Of course, it's got a pyramid. If you guys have studied symbols and occult and, how the elite use these kind of symbols, you'll know that one of their favorites is using a pyramid. Go ahead and check that out. I'm going to leave that as homework for you guys because it is really weird. What I will tell you is that something was found underneath that. Something kind of interesting was found underneath this kind of city. They call it a city. And the deep state tried to do something with it. And that's all I'm going to tell you. That's your little hook. Hopefully that gets you to head on over to our newscast and check it out. You can see our complete newscast, including all of our field messenger reports, the world stories, a full world situation report, and that is available at unitednetwork.tv. But we've got more than that. We have original series. We've got some great shows that are focused on health and wellness. We are here to support you on your journey to really reclaim yourself, to remember who you are as a human being, and you're here at a really great time, because the light side has won and some really amazing things are happening on our planet. If you would like to connect with us, we are on Telegram. There's 2 different channels that I want to tell you about. I will include links in this episode description, so you can just go ahead and click the link. But the first is called Care General Updates Channel. We didn't talk a lot about care in today's episode, but you're going to hear a lot more about that. And this is where we post a lot of content, and it's a channel, so you'll have the ability to comment within the channel on some of the different things. So when we post a newscast, we'll let you know when that's up. And then you can see some of the comments of people talking about the same kind of stuff that we talked about on today's podcast episode. So there's care, and then we have a channel called United Network News Channel, and this is not so much for discussion, but if you want to know when the newscasts are posted, as well as when we release those complete field messenger reports, that's the channel to check out. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you could hit that little follow or subscribe button, whatever you have on your favorite podcast player, because we would love for you to find out about new episodes right when they are posted. For United Network News, this is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt signing off.